Now, for more on the growth of Chinese tourism in the U.S., I spoke with Chris Thompson. He's the president and CEO of Brand USA, and he also represented the U.S. in the annual U.S. China Leadership Summit this month. I began by asking him how the dialogue is helping the tourism industry.
There's been some great accomplishments that have come out that we've been able to celebrate. 10-year visa validity that was put in practice, so now going both ways, once you get a visa, it's good for 10 years. So we're excited about that and excited about our year of tourism. This last fall, President Xi, President Obama declared this the year of tourism for our two countries to continue the collaborative relationship. So I think this summit, more than any other, was our ability to be able to celebrate that and then hopefully carry all those lessons learned in perpetuity in the future.
Now, you mentioned the year of tourism, and part of that goal on the U.S. side is that they want to welcome 100 million visitors to the U.S. by the year 2021. And China is obviously a big part of that. We saw that in 2014, Chinese visitors spent about $24 billion visiting the U.S. at various locations, various parks and things like that. So what can both countries do to make travel more accessible on both sides?
Well, I think that obviously both countries are large, diverse countries with tremendous opportunity and lots of experiences. I think that there's so much more about each country that people from the other country don't know versus what they do know. So I think there's a lot of education that has to go on as it relates to just the actual experiences themselves. The language and the cultures are all very different, so I think it's really important for both sides to gain a greater appreciation. It's one thing to say that you want to welcome growing numbers of people from both sides, but I think you also have to be prepared for that. So I know on our end, that's one of our big goals and our big pushes now is to try to make those destinations and those brands that are not China ready to be more so and give them the tools to be able to do that. So China's a huge part of our path to 100 million. Last year, 2.6 million Chinese traveled to the United States. It's projected to double in the next 5 years. So it's a major contributor to our goal to get to 100 million overall visitors.
And you mentioned the importance of education, especially when it comes to cultural exchanges. So what are both countries doing then to really try and meet the needs of visitors as they try and really reach these goals?
So there have been destinations and brands that have been welcoming Chinese visitors for years. So there are best practices in place already. So what we've been trying to do is reach out to our markets, our cities, our states, and our brands and say, tell us what has worked for you as it relates to being China ready, and then otherwise working with the Chinese government as it relates to what they would be looking for and their visitors would be looking for when they come. Over the course of this year of tourism with China, a major focus of ours has been putting together a toolkit. So we now have an online, easily accessible toolkit for anybody that's already in the market of being China ready, and otherwise those that are trying to be China ready and maybe looking at the market for the first time. And I know they're doing the exact same thing on the other side as it relates to welcoming more U.S. citizens to China.
Now, when people think about the tourism market, a lot of times they just think about just the flight getting there. What sort of costs could we be talking about when you factor in things like the money they spend on restaurants, on accommodation? What sort of figures could we be looking at?
So when you look at the overall travel experience, which would be obviously the airline ticket to get here and then lodging and restaurant, retail, and everything every experience, attractions that they would be doing here, the Chinese are actually our largest spending market. On the average, Chinese spend over $7,000 per person per trip. So that's a significant commitment of resources when you come here. China's the largest spend market we have of all the markets that we attract visitors from. China as a country spends more than Canada, more than Mexico, more than any other market. So all that said, when you look at the Chinese market, you look at the adult population, just the adult population is almost 3 times the population of the United States. When you interview that population base and ask them what is their #1 destination they want to visit, it's the USA. And I think there's equal interest on the other side of U.S. citizens traveling abroad. So I think that's something that plays very favorably into both of our efforts to increase both numbers and spend when people come.
And what are you seeing? You mentioned the flip side. So what are we seeing in terms of U.S. visitors showing an interest in visiting China? Are we seeing any sort of escalation in the sorts of numbers that are interested?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I can't speak to that specifically, but I know that in our conversations with CNTA, they've seen measurable increases as we've been seeing on our end. And I really think that has a lot to do with our two governments recognizing not only the economic contributions of the travel and tourism industry, but the fact that in a soft diplomacy way, it brings cultures together, it brings cultural understanding together, it brings people to people together. And I think in all those efforts, I know that when we're able to attract visitors from China, or really any country around the world, that once we can get them here, their perception of the United States changes in a positive way. So if it was negative, it would be potentially less negative. If it was negative, it could be positive, or even if it was positive, it would be more positive. So I think that's often an appreciated aspect of tourism, which is above just the economic contributions to each of our economies.